The grand crystal ballroom of Ashcroft Palace glittered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their golden light dancing across polished marble floors and gilded walls. It was the most anticipated social event of the London season, where noble families gathered, hoping their daughters would capture the attention of one man, His Grace, Duke Alexander Ashcroft. Everywhere he walked, young ladies in magnificent silk gowns competed for his attention with carefully rehearsed smiles, elegant dances, and endless compliments. Their ambitious mothers whispered strategies from the sidelines, convinced that becoming the Duchess of Ashcroft would secure their family's future forever. Alexander remained polite, but behind his composed expression was quiet exhaustion. He had grown tired of people admiring his title more than his character. Among the guests was Lady Eleanor Hartwell, the daughter of a respected but financially struggling noble family. Unlike the other young ladies, Eleanor had no desire to compete for the Duke's attention. She had attended the ball only because her widowed father insisted it was her duty. Dressed in a graceful ivory empire waist gown with her brown hair elegantly pinned up, she quietly admired the music and conversations from the edge of the ballroom. While the other ladies hurried toward the Duke whenever he appeared, Eleanor noticed something entirely different. Near the side corridor, an elderly woman wrapped in a plain gray shawl had stumbled and nearly collapsed. Most guests ignored her, assuming she was merely a servant who had wandered too close to the ballroom. Without hesitation, Eleanor lifted her skirts, hurried across the marble floor, and gently knelt beside the frightened woman. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly. The elderly woman tried to apologize through tears, explaining she had become dizzy after searching the palace for someone she desperately needed to see. Eleanor helped her sit comfortably, removed her own shawl to keep the woman warm, and quietly asked a servant to bring water, completely forgetting that the Duke himself had just entered the ballroom. As whispers spread among the guests about the Duke's arrival, dozens of noble ladies rushed toward him, each eager to become the first to receive an invitation to dance. Alexander politely acknowledged them, but his attention suddenly drifted across the ballroom. Instead of another woman trying to impress him, he saw Lady Eleanor kneeling beside the elderly stranger, comforting her with genuine compassion while everyone else looked away. Curious, he slowly walked toward them, unaware that the woman Eleanor had chosen to help was not an ordinary stranger at all, but the one person he treasured more than his title, his fortune, or even the duchy itself, his beloved mother. The ballroom slowly fell silent as Duke Alexander crossed the polished marble floor, ignoring the disappointed noble ladies who had expected his attention. Their smiles faded into confusion as they watched him walk past every elegant gown and expensive jewel without a second glance. He stopped only a few feet away from Lady Eleanor, who was still kneeling beside the elderly woman, gently helping her drink a glass of water. Eleanor hadn't even noticed the Duke's arrival. She was too concerned about the trembling woman in her arms. Alexander's eyes softened with relief as he quietly spoke. "Mother." The elderly woman looked up and smiled through her tears. "Alexander." Eleanor froze. Her eyes widened as she realized the frail stranger she had been comforting wasn't a servant at all. It was the Duchess Dowager, the Duke's beloved mother. Shocked whispers immediately spread across the ballroom. Moments earlier, dozens of noble ladies had ignored the elderly woman completely. While rushing to greet the Duke, now they looked away in embarrassment, realizing that the one woman who hadn't been trying to impress him had unknowingly shown the greatest kindness. Alexander knelt beside his mother and gently took her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked with obvious concern. The Duchess smiled warmly and nodded toward Eleanor. "I am, because this young lady never left my side." She gently squeezed Eleanor's hand before continuing. While everyone else hurried to meet a duke, she stopped to help an old woman she believed had nothing to offer her. Alexander turned toward Eleanor, gratitude visible in his eyes. "Lady Eleanor," he said sincerely, "you've done something tonight that no title or fortune could ever purchase." Eleanor lowered her gaze modestly. "I only did what anyone should have done, Your Grace." The Duchess smiled softly. "Sadly, my dear, very few people did." Around them, the noble ladies stood in complete silence, realizing that while they had spent the evening competing for the Duke's attention, Lady Eleanor had earned something far more valuable, his deepest respect. As the orchestra prepared to begin the evening's first waltz, Alexander stood and extended his gloved hand toward Eleanor with a gentle smile. "Lady Eleanor, would you honor me with the first dance of the evening?" Gasps echoed throughout the magnificent ballroom, and every noble family present understood that the most unforgettable moment of the season had nothing to do with wealth, beauty, or status. It had begun with a simple act of compassion. As the orchestra began its elegant waltz, the magnificent ballroom remained unusually quiet. Every noble lady watched in disbelief as Duke Alexander escorted Lady Eleanor to the center of the dance floor. Only minutes earlier, many of them had believed they would receive the Duke's first dance. Instead, the honor had gone to the one woman who had ignored his title and chosen kindness over ambition. Eleanor looked slightly nervous as the Duke gently placed one hand at her waist. "I hope you don't mind all the attention," he said with a warm smile. Eleanor glanced around at the hundreds of watching guests before quietly replying, "To be honest, Your Grace, I'd rather they were looking somewhere else." Alexander laughed softly. "Then perhaps we have something in common." As they danced gracefully beneath the sparkling chandeliers, the Duke couldn't hide his admiration. "My mother has always been an excellent judge of character," he said. "Tonight she told me something she has never said about anyone before." Eleanor looked up curiously. "What was that?" Alexander smiled. "She said your kindness cannot be taught, it comes from your heart." Eleanor lowered her eyes modestly. "My father always reminded me that titles may impress people, but compassion earns their respect." Across the ballroom, several jealous noble families whispered among themselves. Lady Beatrice, whose mother had spent months arranging opportunities for her to meet the Duke, watched with growing frustration. "She only helped an old woman," she muttered bitterly. "Anyone could have done that." Her mother quietly replied, "Yes, but none of us did." Just then, the Duchess Dowager approached the musicians and asked them to pause the music. The ballroom fell completely silent as she stepped forward, with the support of her cane. Looking directly at the assembled guests, she spoke with calm dignity. "Tonight, many of you came hoping to impress my son with wealth, beauty, and noble titles." She then turned toward Eleanor with a gentle smile. "Only one person remembered that true. Nobility is measured by kindness." The guests lowered their eyes in embarrassment while the Duke proudly stood beside Eleanor. At that moment, everyone in the palace realized that Lady Eleanor's greatest quality wasn't her elegance, it was the compassion that had unknowingly won the heart and respect of the most powerful family in the kingdom. When the Duchess Dowager finished speaking, the ballroom remained silent for several long moments. Then, one by one, the guests began applauding, not for the Duke, but for Lady Eleanor. She had never expected such attention and felt her cheeks grow warm with embarrassment. Duke Alexander looked at her with quiet admiration. "You know," he said softly, "I've attended hundreds of balls like this, yet tonight is the first time I've met someone who cared more about a stranger than about meeting a duke." Eleanor smiled gently. "Your Grace, kindness isn't something reserved for important people. Everyone deserves it." Alexander nodded. "Exactly. And that's why you're different." Later that evening, the Duchess invited Eleanor and her father to join the royal family for supper in a private dining room. During the meal, she shared the truth about what had happened earlier. "I wasn't lost by accident," she admitted with a warm smile. "Every year I quietly walk through the palace without attendants to observe how people treat someone they believe has no importance. Tonight almost everyone looked straight past me, except Lady Eleanor." Several members of the royal household smiled knowingly, while Alexander looked toward Eleanor with even greater respect. She had passed a test she never knew existed. Before the evening ended, Alexander escorted Eleanor and her father to the palace entrance. The moonlight illuminated the grand marble staircases. Elegant carriages waited outside. Before Eleanor stepped into her carriage, the Duke handed her a single white rose from the palace garden. "Lady Eleanor," he said sincerely, "tonight you reminded me that true nobility isn't inherited, it is revealed through kindness." Eleanor accepted the flower with a grateful smile. "And you reminded me that even the highest titles mean little without humility." As the carriage slowly rolled away from Ashcroft Palace, the noble ladies watched from the ballroom windows, finally understanding why the Duke had chosen to spend the evening with Eleanor. It wasn't because she wore the finest gown or belonged to the wealthiest family. It was because, while everyone else competed for the Duke's attention, she had quietly chosen compassion over ambition. From that night forward, Lady Eleanor's story spread throughout the kingdom, inspiring countless people to remember that the greatest acts of kindness are often shown when no one is watching, and sometimes helping a stranger changes a destiny forever.